May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord our God. Amen. Betty Carlson was, as you may know, an accomplished knitter. Her daughter, Christine, told me about the many hours Betty spent volunteering for the Salvation Army's Women's Auxiliary, working with the yarn group to make items for their annual craft sales. At Longwood, Betty was a member of the knitting group who made sweaters that they donated to World Vision. Tori, her granddaughter, told me that Betty happened to be the person who finished the group's 1,000th sweater for donation, and she got her paper in the Verona paper for that, or picture in the Verona paper for that. Betty shared her knitting with those she knew and loved as well, not just as a volunteer. For example, she made sweaters and blankets to give to the newly arrived babies of family and friends. And she shared not only the products of her needles, but she also enjoyed teaching others how to knit and helping them to become proficient knitters. Tori tells me that her grandmother taught her to knit when she was young, but she didn't really get into it at the time. But then, during the pandemic, when we all had lots of time at home, Tori picked up knitting again, and Betty was delighted. Now, of course, knitting is just one very, very small piece of who Betty Carlson was. Her life was full and vibrant, with many accomplishments and much love. It was made up of a number of different strands. You could say it was made up of yarns from a number of different skeins. Yarns from her family, her relationships with friends and acquaintances, her professional accomplishments, her volunteer work, her church work. Strands which she then knit together with the actions and choices she made over the course of her life. And when you look back on Betty's full and dynamic life, a complex and beautiful design emerges. A design made up of many individual strands knit together to make a harmonious whole, a lovely fabric. And woven throughout this fabric was love. Love she showed in her actions, by how she cared for people, how she made those who visited her feel welcome and valued, how she kept track of friends and acquaintances, as well as the friends of her children and grandchildren, how she helped and supported others. And thus, I find it especially appropriate that her family chose for Betty's funeral this passage from the first letter of John, a letter that has love as one of its primary themes. A letter written to reassure a community that was troubled by schism and the departure of some of its members. A letter that offers words of hope and encouragement to that original community and to us here who are grieving and sorrowful over the loss of someone we loved. That first word in the passage, see, might actually be translated better as look at. But it calls our attention to the love God has given us and suggests that this love is something we can look at. That God's love is not some fuzzy, warm sensation, but a visible reality. And later in the chapter, past the part we heard today, the author of 1 John goes on to say more about love and about how we as God's children are to love. The author tells us that because we are loved by God, we must love others, and that our love is to be embodied in concrete acts of giving and service. This is what Betty did with her own life. She showed and responded to God's love by loving others with acts of kindness, giving, and caring. But this passage from 1 John offers us more than comfort that Betty was loved by God, more than a reminder that she shared God's love with others by showing them love in visible ways. It also assures us of the future, of what happens to Betty now that she is no longer with us, and what happens to us when we die. The community for which 1 John was written understood that being a beloved child of God is both current reality and future hope. For the author of 1 John tells us twice in this very passage Tori read that we are now children of God. It is a present certainty. And at the same time, he tells us toward the end of it that we cannot know what we will be like until Christ is fully revealed, but that we can trust that as beloved children of God, called into fellowship with God, that we will grow into the likeness of Christ, and that indeed we will be like Christ when that end time comes. So today, as we remember Betty and celebrate her life, we bring a variety of emotions with us. Emotions that range from sadness and loss to regret and disappointment to joy and gratitude. Today's passage from 1 John offers us comfort and hope in the midst of all we are feeling as we grieve. Comfort for those of us left here without her, because we are reassured of being beloved children of God. And hope for Betty and all those who have gone before us, in the promise that we will be like Christ in our lives beyond death.